Welcome everyone to our think tank with Agility Logistics. My name is Dr. Jennifer Winward and I'm the founder and CEO of Winward Academy. I'm thrilled to be here today with an incredible group of professionals from Agility for us all to learn more about supply chain. Now, we all likely take supply chain for granted. We walk into an Apple store and what we want to buy is magically available on the shelf. We walk into a CVS or a Walgreens and the COVID-19 vaccine is available. But again, that's only after it's been transported under very strict temperature conditions to keep it safe and effective. So how does this all happen, right? That's what we're excited to learn today. As again, we're joined by 4 professionals who work at Agility Logistics in various capacities. Now I'm going to pull up the chat here and copy and paste a link. If any of you are interested in kind of reading more about the bios for our panelists today, feel free to click on that link in the chat and you can read more about each of them. Now, in terms of an agenda of what we're doing today, we're first going to be joined by Mr. Masood Alam, who will give us an overview of supply chain. Then Mr. Wessel is going to address the changing landscape and capture how logistics is an evolving industry. Ms. Poole will outline higher education opportunities and specific fields of study that support students in this growing industry. And Mr. Sharma is going to take us through the use of technology in supply chain and what the future holds. Then, of course, at the end, we're going to set aside some time to address any questions that you all write in the chat. So we do encourage you to do that throughout the presentation, and then we'll be sure to loop back to them at the end. Again, we want to give a huge thank you to Agility for supporting the Carol Kimmelman Athletic and Academic Campus and for working with Winward Academy to provide this opportunity to youth to learn more about such a critical and growing industry. Now, as we jump into today's think tank, I'm also going to introduce you all to Camden, who's a high school student from San Diego joining us today as a co-moderator. He's very interested in the business field and has prepared lots of great questions for our panelists. So I would now like to invite both Camden and our first presenter, Mr. Masood Alam, to please turn on their cameras and microphones to join us. Good morning. Can you both hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, great.
Yep.
And Mr. Alam, did you want to go ahead and share your screen? And Camden, why don't you get us started with the first question for Mr. Alam?
Okay.
Can you see my screen now?
Yes, we can.
Thank you.
We would love to learn more about the world supply chain. Would you be able to give us a short explanation of the meaning of global logistics with a concrete example or two?
That's a good question, Camden. First of all, thank you for the opportunity. I think it's very interesting to connect back to high school, if I could say that. So let's talk about supply chain management, right? If you can see my screen, I kind of put together a little bit of a pictorial display of how supply chains work. Supply chain in its very basic form is basically, delivering goods from point A to point B in time, in full for our customers, right? And the transport of these goods from point A to point B is called the word logistics, right? Logistics really means, the process which takes to plan, implement, and control the flow of goods, right? So if you could see on my on the screen on the left, right? So you have raw materials which are then moved to suppliers, and then sorry about that. So they move to suppliers, and then to the manufacturer, and then to distributor, retailer, and ultimately the customer. So this is the world of supply chain, right? So now let me take that as an example in a very basic form, so every one of us can relate to it. So we all know Nike. We all love Nike shoes. We love the Air Jordans. My son loves it, at least. So Nike, how do you, if you could imagine, how do you get these shoes at the store, right? So what happens behind the scenes, there's a whole big world, a complex world of how these things move from the most basic factories somewhere in some part of the world, and then you have all these laces and the material which goes into the shoes is then transported out to another set of suppliers, and then these suppliers take the design that Nike provides to them and they build these shoes and they design them and make sure that it meets the quality specification that Nike and all of us love, right? You know, the design, the style, and the quality. And then from those vendors or manufacturers, it is then moved to by air, ocean, rail, ship. They all moved out to Nike warehouses. And from the Nike warehouses, they moved to all the distributors. When I talk about distributors, I'm talking about Foot Locker, Foot Action, Macy's. So you name it, right? Just some of the stores that we relate to. We all love going into Foot Locker to look at Nike shoes. That's what I love doing with my son. So we then move it to the retailers, and then once it's at the retailer's store on the shelf, then we go as customers buy these shoes, and then that creates the demand for these shoes, right? So once Nike figures out that, hey, you know what, the Air Force Ones are really popular, everyone loves them, you know, we got to make more of them, then it goes back again to the Nike uh, headquarters and they say, hey, you know what, Air Force Ones are really cool. Let's get more of them made. So that again, the messages go back to the suppliers to make more of these shoes or these products. And that's how the supply chain loop keeps flowing, right? So, in a nutshell, I think that's the best way to explain how supply chains work and what logistics, the most important part of supply chain is, right? Yeah.
Yeah, that overview was really helpful. Thank you. I think just kind of getting a better sense of this cycle, right? And how
Yeah.
it continues to perpetuate as we consumers continue to have demand for products, right? It's just kind of keeping this
You,
cycle going.
yeah.
So I know that Mr. Alam, you gave us that example with Nike.
Hmm.
Agility Logistics works with other, equally huge brands, right? In clothing, technology, car companies. So I know that your specific role at Agility is more within customer management, right? Or kind of the management of those programs. Can you walk us through like what you actually do for these companies?
Right. So that's a very good question, Jennifer. Thank you. So customer program management is all about, you know, how we manage our large customers. Now, managing large customers and their supply chains is not easy, right? You know, it involves a lot of people, hundreds of thousands of people working on both sides of the customer as well as agility. Now, what the customer program manager does in his role is to work on a daily basis with the customer, make sure that we are meeting the goals, we make sure we are delivering to the customer on time, right? Now that involves a lot of things, right? You know, you have all these thousands and hundreds of thousands of vendors globally. We need to make sure that we meet all these vendors. We need to make sure all these vendors understand that we are moving the goods for our customer. Essentially, you can talk about high fashion retail, you can talk about vaccines, life sciences, you can talk about energy customers like, you know, companies which make turbines and power generation material. So we meet all these vendors in the factories. We make sure that we can collect the goods on time, and all those specifications of how we handle the cargo, temperature control, or making sure it's safe, it's protected, there's no pilferage, etc. So the customer program manager essentially drives this requirement within the agility organization to make sure that we're meeting the goals and the KPIs, the key performance indicators of our customers, right? Now, what the other side of this role also involves a lot of traveling. I know all of us love traveling. You get a chance to see different parts of the world. You get to meet a lot of different cultures. You get to understand different people, how you interact with them, but all by making sure that we are keeping the customer's requirements, you know, as the most important thing, right? You know, in our portfolio. Yeah.
And to go into more depth about the trade, the news last week had a story about a ship blocking the Suez Canal for almost a week. which led to a major disruption of global commerce. Could you please expand on what happened?
Yeah, Camden, that's something we're all going through right now. I think we're all facing it. We're going through it. So the best way for me to kind of describe this was to help everyone understand. We all need to understand how global trade networks work, right? I mean, as you know, today we have GPS, we have Google Maps, we have Waze. So anytime I want to go from Orange County to LA, I can use Waze and it shows me the shortest and the fastest way to really get from point A from my house to, let's say, a basketball game in LA, right? So now the Suez Canal is one such shortcut, right, that was created about in 1869. Now, what they did is, if you can look at my screen here, so the Suez Canal is really a short, small channel that was created in 1869, which runs between the Mediterranean and the Red Sea, right? So it connects these two waterways together, and it really is the one channel which cuts Asia and Africa between it, right? So what happened with the recent Suez Canal incident is that a ship called Evergreen, which was carrying about 20,000 containers. So you can imagine how big this ship was. This was about a 400-meter long or 1,300 feet long ship. So it was kind of moved around and buffeted by strong winds. And you can see here what it really did. So this is really the Suez Canal, right? It's just a narrow strip of water. And this ship was moved by strong winds, and it just clogged the whole canal, right? And because there's only the most ironic part about the Suez Canal is really that you could only have one ship pass through at each time. You cannot have two ships pass each other, just like our freeways, right? It is not a big freeway, it's just a small, small strip of water, right? So this blocked the canal on both sides, and you had about 400 ships blocked on either side of the canal. And I can tell you about the impact of what it did to us, right? So on a global trade level, there was about 9.6 billion worth of goods stuck on each side, right, of the canal. And it costed us about $6.7 million a minute. Not just us, I'm talking about global trade. So it costed global trade about $6.7 million a minute. Now, the impact of the Suez Canal is kind of really important. We need to understand what it does, right? So this is how normally goods from Asia travel all the way back into Europe, right? So this is how it does through the Suez Canal. Now, what it did is that because the canal was blocked, now all the ships had to take this long pass across Africa and then go into Europe, right? So this is essentially why the Suez Canal was created in the first place, so that we can cut short the travel time. Now, in terms of travel time, what it did is it extended, because of the blockage, it extended the travel time by about 12 to 15 days. And not only that, because the ships were all stuck on either side of the canal, it put a huge embargo on aircrafts, because we had to now use air freight to move the vaccines. We had to use other means of transport. We had to use multimodal transport, sea, air, using different routes to move the cargo. We couldn't move cars, manufactured cars, between Europe and Middle East, which is a very important market for them. And also, most importantly, it also put a huge embargo on vaccines, right? Because now you had a huge pressure on aircrafts being used for other material being moved, and the vaccines had to have priority, obviously. So that's in a nutshell how the Suez Canal blockade, kind of impacted every one of us, right? And it really impacted all of us in a very large way. I mean, we wouldn't even know, but because of the embargo, the shortage of vessels, I think we didn't have a lot of retail, products in our stores, because everything else was kind of rippled and blocked, right? So yeah.
Wow. Yeah. And the idea that the impact of this one ship that ends up kind of blocking the canal, that it costs $6.7 million per minute.
Yep.
that adds up really fast, right? When we think about kind of a global impact of having this. And so anyway, and I love this slide that you prepared too, because I think it was really helpful to visualize like, where is the Suez Canal? And kind of what is its role in normally kind of shortcutting that path from Asia to Europe. And then, what happens if there is a blockage, right? And how big of an impact that it really had on our global economic system.
Yeah.
So, well, Mr. Alam, this has been so helpful again to just kind of start us off with this great overview of kind of what is supply chain, like what is logistics. So thank you again so much for providing this overview. If you don't mind staying with us, we're going to go now and chat with Mr. Wessel, but we'd love for you to share or to come back at the end and just kind of do Q&A with our students. So again, thank you, and we'll see you in a little bit.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, thanks. And Mr. Wessel, if you are there, if you could please turn on your camera and microphone. Perfect. Welcome.
Yep. Hey, thanks. Super excited to be here. Yeah, so thank you so much for inviting me.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for being with us. So I'm going to jump into the first question with you. So I think that Mr. Alam really provided a great overview for us of just kind of what is supply chain. But I think something a lot of us would really love to know more about is, could you expand about how the COVID-19 pandemic kind of changed or impacted supply chain and this movement of goods around the world?
Yeah, so listen, thank you for that question. It's really interesting because I would say the pandemic has had some dramatic impacts for all of us related to supply chain. And a lot of these changes, I think, are going to be permanent changes. So maybe what do I mean by that? So when you go back to in January of 2020, we saw this kind of virus coming. Nobody was quite sure. And then during Chinese New Year, kind of in the latter part of January, or actually last year was in February, all of a sudden that's kind of when it really became pretty dramatic. And what it was doing back then, it was impacting where a lot of the manufacturing has happened for the goods that we buy, right? Shoes, watches, everything. A lot of that's produced in Asia, and of that, a lot of that's produced in China. So all of a sudden, people started getting sick. They weren't allowed to come back to work. So we had a labor shortage. That labor shortage, we still feel the downstream effects of that labor shortage. So all of a sudden, production was delayed. There wasn't a lot of goods being produced. Then in turn, you couldn't get raw material. So the goods that you need to bring into the factory to produce what you're trying to produce. And so as we went into the holiday season last year, there was fewer items available for us to purchase given limited stores. So what did that mean? It meant we saw this early, our industry saw this early, and we got really concerned. So we immediately, a lot of the vessels stopped sailing. Everybody was trying to protect the business, right? Protect costs. A lot of the companies laid a lot of people off. It's been a very, the worst part about this pandemic, besides, the people dying, is there is tens of millions of people in the United States and, many more of that in different parts of the world that lost their jobs. But the other thing is, all of a sudden, the economy, and I think that we were more resilient than people realized. So we all stopped going to school. We all stopped going to work, and we were working from home. So nobody was spending money on traveling and doing all of that. So people were putting focus on their homes. So we were still buying things. So all of a sudden the industry realized, oh, we need more equipment. We need more ships to start sailing. And all of a sudden, you had the vaccine production happening, and that took most of the aircraft out of commercial lift so that we could use that to bring vaccines in and the PPE equipment, ventilators, and all that. Because the other thing that we learned from a supply chain perspective as part of the pandemic is we were not prepared. A lot of parts of the world were not prepared for something like this happening. We were outsourcing everything that we needed for getting people protected and getting the vaccine had to come from different parts of the world. So now everybody's rethinking the supply chains, right? Should we be producing everything in different parts of the world? Now, the second thing that happened is companies and the industry very quickly put a lot more attention on technology. And what technology did was it made certain things that people used to do, solutions technology can do around tracking ships, around updating information. And that in turn increased productivity for the companies, which in turn actually improved profit. So they've learned to do more with less, which inevitably means it's more profitable. The third and maybe final thing is supply chain has become substantially more important and more recognized, not only in corporate America, but also if you think about what we were talking about during the presidential election and all that. It's how do we make sure that we've got the right equipment at the right locations and the right skill sets to make that happen. We shouldn't have to rely on the military and Project Warp Speed to get all this done. So for those people that are interested in logistics as a career, it is becoming, I don't know if sexier is the right word, but obviously a lot more important and recognized within corporate America. So that's kind of maybe to me, kind of the changes that have happened.
That's very interesting. And you manage teams around the world, which likely has challenges with time zones, languages, and team dynamics. So, what qualities are you looking for when you're hiring people around the world?
Great question. And yeah, so I've got people that work for me kind of throughout the whole network, right? So I think the number one thing I'm looking for is I'm always looking for attitude and aptitude as opposed to just skill. So I need people that want to be independent thinkers, that are self-motivated and can work on their own. Because, for example, if you are working out of your home office in Seoul, Korea, you and I aren't going to be sitting near each other, right? So from a management perspective, I need to make sure that you are comfortable working on your own, you're self-motivated, disciplined. I think discipline in business is critically important. And then the other thing is I need people who, and I want people who are very good communicators. And what I mean by communicators is ability to communicate and engage with different people from different cultures. Because part of what I do is I talk to people from different parts of the world on a daily basis. Sometimes English isn't their first language. I can't speak Mandarin, right? As an example. So it's how we engage. And I want people who are curious, right? I want them to take our customers that we manage and think about how do I make their business better? Because that's what we're responsible for doing. And how do I engage people from around the world to make sure that we deliver the best possible service and give them the best experience? So independent thinkers, intellectual curiosity, and people who really are able to deal with a multicultural environment. Those are the kind of the key things when I'm looking to interview people.
And I know, Camden, you have another question for Mr. Wessel, but I can't help myself and I have to jump in on something because what you just described that you're looking for in someone you hire is pretty much exactly the same thing as what colleges are looking for when they accept students, right? Looking for students who are independent thinkers, disciplined, who embrace other cultures, and who are intellectually curious, right? So because my brain always goes to everything related to college admissions, I just had to kind of point that out again for our students on the call, right? There's a lot of consistency between what businesses are looking for in people they hire and what colleges are looking for in terms of, again, those qualities and the characteristics of the people that they're kind of bringing in, whether it's into their company or into their college. So anyway, sorry, I had to interject with that, but Camden, go ahead and ask Mr. Wessel another question.
Yeah, so thank you for sharing more about your qualities and how you prioritize hiring. I'd now like to ask you to elaborate more on your personal journey. You did your undergrad work at Cal Poly SLO, and then you
Mhm.
attended the London Business School. Did you go straight from undergrad to grad school, or did you take off time in between? And if you took off time in between, why?
All right, great. Yeah, so I am a proud Cal Poly grad, and my daughter goes there, so I always have to get that plug in. But what I did, I have an interesting journey. So I graduated with a forestry degree, and I had a completely different career for my first 6 years at a university. I happened to, I would say, fall into this industry because I've always been interested in traveling, always wanted to do things internationally. So I got into this career at a very ground level salesperson and worked my way up because I really, really enjoy the industry. I love this industry. And probably 10 years into my career, my company at the time gave me an offer. They said, we would be willing to engage you a little bit more on, a grad program. So I decided to do something in a completely different part of the world, a completely different teaching style. So that's kind of why I attended the London Business School. And again, in the early thing, I met people from all over the world of all skill sets, religions, mindsets, and it was probably the most rewarding time of my career from a higher education learning, because I got so much great experience and knowledge. And like I tell everybody, it's always possible to make changes along the way as you find things that all of a sudden you're interested in, because it's super important. It was always super important for me to follow what I enjoyed doing.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I love too, because it seems like there's this continuous thread in what you're sharing around the importance of embracing and learning from people from other cultures, right? That you had this more international experience in London. And I mean, I'm sure that that experience also informed the way that you currently do your business, right? And the way that you interact with people from around the world all the time. Because I think it's good for the students joining us to know how global this industry is, because so many young people love learning about other cultures and love connecting with people, from different backgrounds than what they have. And so it's just so great to hear over and over how critical that piece
This
is.
is a completely international mindset. I've spent 15 years of my career living in Asia, right? And so that I would have never been able to do that had I not gotten into this industry. And it's made my family and myself, it's completely enriched our lives in a way that you even have a hard time articulating, but it's been the best thing we ever did
Yeah.
for
Oh,
us
that's awesome.
personally. Yeah.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for being with us. And we're going to go ahead and welcome now Miss Shannon Poole. So Mr. Wessel, don't go anywhere because we'll have you back here in a few minutes. Miss Poole, good morning. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to go ahead and ask you the first question. And I love to, because we kind of ended with Mr. Wessel on more of kind of the college journey path question. So this one's really great to tee up for you is, as supply chain expands and, it's this field with great potential, how do you see colleges and universities kind of shifting what they're doing to support students' education to kind of meet these demands?
So you've kind of heard a little bit from Masood and Jens, but one of my favorite quotes about logistics is that I work in logistics, which means I solve problems you didn't even know you had in ways you can't even imagine. Right? We've got great examples from both of them that you've already heard today of how we do that on a daily basis, working with a lot of different people, a lot of different geographies, a lot of different cultures, all of that. So this field offers endless opportunities in strategic problem solving in diverse environments. Okay. So when you're looking at higher education and looking at their programs, looking for programs that design their educational structures around team challenges that solve problems, including surprise twists, right? You get certain instructions and certain tools to begin your problem solving exercise. And then an hour before the assignment is due, you're given a twist of an extra piece of money that you now need to figure out how to invest, or a new team member joins, or the teams get totally shaken up. So when you have a structure program that brings the technical skills into that kind of environment, it makes you a lot stronger problem solver. And so in my opinion, that's absolutely the biggest thing that you should look for in your programs, right? When you take every opportunity to see things from various angles, build that muscle memory to sustain the skill, right? It doesn't matter if you're trying to think of different ways to get around traffic. It's problem solving, and you're building that muscle memory for the long term. And when you pair that with the technical knowledge that you learn in school, like economics, geography, geopolitics, you're going to become a lot more well-rounded problem solvers and can bring a lot more value to your organization.
And what advice do you have for students interested in pursuing this field?
So as you're going through life, start looking at everything around you in the terms of supply chain. Again, you heard two great examples, well, actually three, when you consider things like the Nike shoes, of how things move around the world and some of the challenges. So how did something arrive on the store shelf? Why is it packaged the way that it is? What are the raw materials that are involved in creating that product? And where was it manufactured? Where was it assembled? Who was involved in purchasing and transporting? What are the governments or cultures that are involved? So if you think about something and it says on the back that it was made in China, and you just heard in the news that there's some conflict going on in the US government or US China relations, then maybe that impacted how that product got to you today and how it gets to you in the future. Think about all the news clips, weather, politics, strikes. How does that impact the supply chain? I live in Houston, and the Port of Houston is one of our biggest ports in the United States. I know a lot of you live towards the Port of Los Angeles. In Houston, we have to worry about things like hurricanes coming through, and that just shuts down everything in the supply chain, including the oil rigs that are out in the Gulf that are used to make the plastics that are raw materials of so much of what we are involved in, right, or the things that we purchase. How do all of these parties track the progress of their inventory through the supply chain, right? So those are, when you're looking in the world, those are things to kind of look at. When you're in the actual field, there's a lot of different things that you can be part of, and you need to think about what you enjoy and the roles that could be, right? So purchasing. If you're involved in purchasing raw material or finished goods, it involves a lot of contracts, a lot of math, and a lot of negotiation. If you're involved in operations, you're doing a lot of diverse coordination with a wide variety of people. You've got to call 40 people around the world to get that Nike shoe from point A to point B and on the shelf of Foot Locker. Customs, it requires a significant knowledge of regulations. So you got to be really good at reading very technical legal documentation. The other thing you need to think about is, where do you want to live, right? You just heard Jens talk about living overseas for 15 years of his career. I've been in this industry for 20 years. I've never lived internationally. I never had to move internationally, but I do an extensive amount of international travel, right? Think about what kind of cultures you want to work for. Do you want to specialize in the China relationship and maybe go learn Mandarin and those kinds of things? Or do you want to be a little bit more diverse and work with organizations or countries from around the world? All of this is going to help you hone in on the field that you want to pursue, but also understand that it is still a chain. Your ability to change fields and focuses later as your personal life evolves is absolutely open in the supply chain and logistics industry. And that's one of the things that I love about it. When I was younger and didn't have family commitments, I traveled constantly. I was literally home about 4 days a month. But now I don't want to do that. I want to be home with my family. And so I've moved and evolved my career to be able to do that a little bit more. Keep that bigger picture in mind and allow your problem solving skills to continue to hone so you can transcend the specific roles and responsibilities for one particular field and can continue to grow.
Yeah, that's great. And it sounds like one thing too that was kind of a common thread connects back to what Mr. Wessel shared about intellectual curiosity, right? Noticing in your environment everywhere how supply chain impacts everything, and then trying to identify and connect to, well, what would I really like to do within this industry, whether it has more to do with international relations or with finance. And because it just sounds like you can kind of do anything, right, within logistics. It's just a matter of kind of finding that great fit.
And that's what's wonderful about this field, right? When you're in high school and even coming out of college, your knowledge of what you really want to do, it's difficult and it's going to evolve, and that's okay. And in supply chain, that's incredibly flexible to be able to do all of those different things and still focus on moving goods around the world and servicing your customers.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And it also sounds like it sure isn't going anywhere, right? Because no matter what, we are always going to be moving goods around the world as people are purchasing them. So it seems like there's also a lot of stability within this industry as well, which is of course really important as people are thinking about their careers.
Correct. We're global consumers and we're a global economy. Nobody produces everything. No country produces everything themselves. They all depend on some other country somewhere in the world for something. And that has to be moved. And that's what we do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. So one more question for you, Ms. Poole. Um, I know that at various companies, so not just at Agility, but also in some of your prior work, you've been responsible for setting up internship opportunities. Can you expand more on kind of what tips you have for our high school students joining us today if they're interested in an internship, whether it's within supply chain or other industries?
So I am a huge proponent of internships. It's a lot like getting a regular job, but a whole lot less commitment. And it gives you, the student, a taste of what it is like to work in that field, in that company, and in an office environment, which is very different than most people have jobs when they're young. So huge proponent of trying to make that happen for students and get that out there. Understand that it is typically internships are very painful for companies. They're not going to get a lot out of the students, but it is also their opportunity to invest in the future, and it's our corporate responsibility to give back. So that's why they do it. Okay, so don't put too much pressure on yourself that you have to have a ton of experience. Okay, they're not looking for that. How do you get an internship? You network and apply. So joining organizations or attending luncheons or even virtual events similar to this, where you're learning about what organizations do and starting to make contacts and finding that person that maybe does an internship program within a company. And focus your application and resume on any experience that gives you a little bit of foundational knowledge, right? So if you took any kind of course in high school that was highly mathematical and you enjoyed it and did really well, then you can maybe even look at the finance department of a logistics company. Or maybe they have a project that's involved in doing some sort of audits where you can go back and review documents and help them do those kinds of things. That's the kind of thing you need to focus your resume on. They're not expecting experts. They want to know that you have a little bit of knowledge so they don't have to teach you the basics of things like math or reading extensive documents or something like that. And then they're going to help you to go forward in your internship with learning more, right? They're going to want some basic etiquettes like showing up on time, putting your cell phone away, not bringing your pet turtle to work. True story. That's what they're going to be looking for from you. Okay. They're going to expect you to be observant and engaged, like we talked about a few minutes ago. When you're participating in one, take every single second to learn. Even if they're asking you to make copies of paper documents, which we're trying to get away from, and this whole COVID experience is letting us become a little bit more paperless. But even if somebody just said, hey, can you go make copies of this for me? Look at the paper. Try to understand what is on that paper that is so important that we need to make copies. Why does this paper exist? We have documents in our industry like bills of lading or commercial invoices. Look at the different documents and see how they compare to each other and try to understand things like that. Um, Use the opportunity to learn about working in this office environment. Watch how people interact with each other. How do they go about their day? Are they rushing to meetings? What does their desk look like? And that starts to give you a vibe of, is this good for me? Is this a space I want to work in? Right? Do I want to be in an open air environment? Do I want to be in an office environment? Do I want to be in a lot of meetings? All of that is going to give you the experience to kind of test that out for a couple of months before you move on. You also want to watch the work culture and assess how that fits with you. What are the conversations like between the employees? That gives you more ideas. Are they all speaking in English? Are they speaking in different languages? Are they speaking on Zoom, telephone calls, face to face? All of that gives you an idea of what it's going to be like for you to be there.
Mhm.
And the biggest tip I have is to write down at least 10 questions or findings each day. Through your internship, this is your log, this is your journal, and you will look back on this in 10 or 15 years and think, oh, that's how I wound up to evolve to where I am.
Mhm.
Try to find a mentor or a dozen, anybody that'll help answer your questions, and they'll walk through those questions with you and your thoughts and help you evolve that. It's a very short, very special time in your life. Make the most of it.
Yeah, that's great. I love that idea of the daily kind of learning log. Because I mean, that's just a great practice anyway, right? To really connect to what am I learning? And they might learn things that they don't like at the same time that they're learning things that they like, right? But it's just all
Absolutely.
about recognizing those things. So.
Yep.
Well, that's great. Well, thanks so much, Ms. Cool, especially for really honing in for us on the specifics of kind of the educational journeys and the skills and kind of that internship process for our students. That's so helpful.
You're welcome.
So we'll welcome you back here in about 10 minutes. At this time, we would love to welcome Mr. Sharma. So go ahead. Yes, perfect. We can see you. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Perfect. Great. Well, thank you so much. So I think Camden has the first question for you. And then did you want to share your screen? We can make sure that's working.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, it is. Go ahead, Camden.
Okay, perfect.
So your background has been laser focused on technology. What is Internet of Things and how does that fit into supply chain?
Yeah, thanks, Camden, for that question. I hope you can see my screen. Yeah, I have been working in technology for nearly 35 years, and I've seen it change dramatically back from the 80s to the 90s to the 2000s and now to the 2020s. And like some of this, you may have heard how the pandemic has changed the world, especially in terms of technology. And supply chain industry, like Masood, Jens, and Shannon mentioned, is one of the oldest industry, and it has been doing things in a certain way. But with technology coming in, things are changing. And Internet of Things, or like most people call it IoT, is one of the major changes that has come into the industry, especially the supply chain industry. What Internet of Things like as you can see on the screen is basically these small devices, size of your cell phones, that basically tell you where they are and the condition they are in. So example, is it too cold? Is it too hot? Is it how fast am I going? How has somebody dropped me? So it tells you all those things. So as a consumer, imagine if you bought a computer from China and it's being transported. So you want to know where it is, you want to know what the condition it is in, you want to know by what date it's going to get to me. All of that can be done using this thing called Internet of Things, IoT. And the way things are going, IoT will become something that end up with on every object. Like when you buy something from Amazon and they send it to you, in the future they'll have an IoT device embedded into it, so you know exactly where shipment is and when you'll get it and so on. So in this particular screen, you can see these yellow devices. These are what we call the Internet of Things, and you can see some boxes on which you have placed those devices. So when those set of boxes start moving, we'll know where they are and so on. So that's what it does. The next screen, I'll show you the sorry, yeah, here we go. And then this is another screen where we have put the internet, the IoT device into the packaging itself. Again, the idea being that you know where it is. So what the customer sees will be something like this, where you have a map of the world and you can see in that green line that's moving, that's where how the shipment is moving. So as it moves, it tells you where it is. Like Masood mentioned about the Suez Canal, how it's got blocked up. So that would tell us exactly what shipments are stuck there because of the blockage. So it's a very useful product to use. In the past, before IoT came along, people used to call us and ask us, where's my goods? When will I get them? And when they get them, sometimes they're not well. Imagine shipping a container of cheese and that cheese goes bad and you only find out after you get it. So here you'll get to know about it if it's gone bad. And one more slide just to uh, explain. So here you have another example of how over air the IoT device can track your shipments. The IoT devices send out signals. So when they're in an aircraft, those signals are not sent because it's in the air. But once it's back on the ground, it again starts sending it. So the future is good for IoT. You can expect to see it in many, many more things to come. And it'll be part of our life. Sometimes somebody might say it's giving too much information, but it does help the business community to know exactly what's happening to their consignments.
And could you briefly expand on blockchain for those of us learning about it today? And what is the future of blockchain in your field?
Right. So blockchain is a little bit complicated word for many people to understand. And what it basically means is that you have a centralized database, um, and everybody who moves something, let's say from point A to point B, updates that database. The difference is that in that database, once you make a record, once you write something into the database, you cannot change it. So that's what makes it very secure. So you can't say that I moved something and then change your mind and come back and say, let's take that, let me change that to say I didn't move it. Things like that you cannot do. So it's a public database and everybody writes to it. And once you've written to it, you can't undo it, or you can't change it, or you can't delete it. So that becomes a permanent record. So what happens in supply chain, especially in supply chain, is you've got so many different vendors, like Masood explained. You have the manufacturer making raw material. He sends it to the supplier. The supplier converts that into finished code. He sends it to the trucking company. The trucking company transports it to the port, and the ship picks it up, and it goes till it gets to the consumer. So a lot of different people are involved in it. So you want to make sure that when the first person says he has shipped it, he has actually really shipped it. So he writes into a blockchain where it gets written, and then nobody can change it after that. And the next person writes his part. So the next person says, I didn't get it. Then obviously something has gone wrong between the point it was delivered to and the point he picked it up. So you know the first person wasn't lying because he wrote to it and it has left his warehouse, and now the next person has not got it. So blockchain has come in. The reason it's becoming so important is because logistics continues to increase. More and more, the movement of goods is happening from one part of the world to the other, and therefore it takes that much more time to get to you. And therefore people want to know that what I'm seeing, is it true or not? So it helps in confirming that what is being said is actually the case. The future is definitely good. It is a long way to go. I wouldn't say blockchain is something that will become as powerful, as popular as IoT in the next 1 or 2 years. It may take another 3 to 5 years before it becomes more and more well known and used. Primarily because blockchain is a very technically deep area. Unlike IoT, which all you need to do is to take a device and put it into a consignment. In the case of blockchain, you really have to do a lot of programming. So you need a lot of software engineers, you need a lot of technicians who actually understand the technology and then can program it and then have customers use it. But definitely it has a good future as trade grows, as we become bigger and bigger as an industry and so on. Blockchain's use will continue to increase.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's useful to kind of better understand some of this terminology, right? That a lot of us hear and might not fully understand.
Right.
So, Mr. Sharma, I kind of checked out the Agility Twitter before connecting today because I wanted to get a sense of some of the global projects that you were working on. And I actually saw that there are some tremendous philanthropic projects that you do at Agility, right? So I saw that you donated transportation of 9 tons of medical supplies to Uganda for refugees. You helped move an MRI machine in an airplane. It sounded like maybe that was the first time it had happened in an airplane versus freight to India for GE. Is there a particular project that you've worked on at Agility that you're, uniquely proud of?
Thank you for the question, Jennifer. There are, like you mentioned, Agility is heavily involved in giving back to the community, not just to a particular country, but across the world. So like you mentioned about Africa, we have done a lot of projects where we have not only given back in terms of material like food or pharmaceutical goods and so on, but also services that we provide. So There are lots of, one of the things that at least I like about agility is the option to innovate and to try out new things and to experiment, which definitely helps to bring in a more interesting way to work versus doing the usual projects day in and day out. And I'm from the technology area. So one of the things that I personally enjoyed, for example, one of the huge projects that we did was to automate the process of delivering and picking up goods by our delivery agents. So in other words, when many of you must have seen this, when somebody shows up from Amazon, they'll have some kind of device in their hand through which they scan the goods to say they've been delivered. But we don't have our own trucks and own planes. We use third-party agents, so we can't give them these devices. So what we did was we created a mobile app that allows a driver to install it on his cell phone. So when he goes to pick up goods or deliver goods, all he needs to do is to take that app and scan the barcode or the QR code that's on the package. And that tells us back in our offices that this package has been delivered. And so the customer get to know. And in our industry, there's something called a POD, which is a proof of delivery, which some of you must be getting when you get a delivery from Amazon. You get an email saying that your package has been delivered. We do the exact same thing. We send that same kind of, not an email, we send an actual document to the customer saying that the goods you had sent, given to us to deliver, we have delivered them. So that is all done using that mobile app. The reason it was an interesting project to work with is because there was no additional hardware needed. We didn't have to go and buy 1,000 devices. We used our the existing infrastructure that drivers had. That means the phones.
Mhm.
All we did was, here's an app. We sent it to them remotely. They installed it, and it did what we wanted to do.
Yeah, that was
So things
smart.
like that helps. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Jennifer.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I was just saying that was so smart, right? Because you could have gone and created hundreds of thousands of devices that people would have to carry. But the idea of saying, hey, let's just build an app because everyone's
Right.
already has a cell phone, that was genius, right?
Yeah.
And it's just as effective. So that's really interesting. Well, we just have about 6 minutes left, so I'd love to welcome back everybody who participated. For any of the students on the call, if you have any questions for any of the panelists, please feel free again to put them in the chat or the Q&A. There is one question here that I'll throw out to start is, and again, if you'd like to answer this, just maybe throw your hand up and you can jump in, is for students who kind of are thinking about a career path, right? You're kind of starting here, and then the idea is that throughout your career, you're working your way up. I'd love for one of you to share kind of what advice you would have for what characteristics or kind of behaviors are really critical for students as they're kind of maybe starting a career and then looking to advance.
I'll give one. Sorry. Go ahead, Masood.
Go ahead, Shannon. Allow you to say.
So that's a great example of what I was going to say. You've got to be able to work with people, have respect for each other, and engage with them. It doesn't matter your personal differences or things like that. It's to be absolutely professional and realize that we're all trying to produce good work for our company and keep that positive interaction between people so that you can work through those problems.
Great. Mr. Alam, did you want to expand?
Uh, yeah, the other thing is, I think those traits are very important. I would consider them to be soft skills, which are very important for you to operate in any organization. The hunger is what I think is very important. You need to have that hunger for growth. You need to have the hunger to learn and constantly innovating, right? Because innovation keeps you going. So, and the inspiration for innovation should come from a lot of different places. Maybe you do your day job and then you go and you do something entirely different outside of your working hours and meet different people, because that gives you ideas. You could meet a medical doctor and you could get inspired or get an idea of how they're dealing with situations. So I think the hunger, having people skills, as Shannon said, and just the drive to do the best of what you do, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then another question here is about, let's say there's a student who wants to just kind of stay up to date, like what is happening in the logistics industry, what, to Mr. Sharma's points, like what are the evolving technologies that are being used? Like, how can people in high school learn about this or stay up to date about these changing trends?
I'll just take a shot at that. Basically, main thing really is to read. The more you read, the more you not study per se, but read articles, read magazines. And now with the technology where it is, you can get onto webinars, you can get to hear experts talking about their fields. There's so many different ways to ask questions on LinkedIn, on Twitter, and so on. So main thing is to and you're right, the knowledge is coming from all directions. There's so many different things that are happening at the same time. So more you can spend time reading, the better it's going to be.
LinkedIn is also a very good shortcut in terms of that. There's a lot of good information on LinkedIn. The other thing I would tell people is you can, for free, you can get a daily update from the Wall Street Journal, and that will give you a high level update in terms of kind of what's happening in the world of logistics. And it's at a very high level. So it gives you an understanding of what that means for other industries, because that's the one exciting thing about our industry is we deal with everybody from apparel people to chemicals to industrial to moving salmon from Chile to the US. So we get a good cross section of business out there.
I think the Journal of Commerce is good too. It's another good resource that focuses on a lot of logistics activity.
So maybe what I'll do, if it's okay, I'll follow up with you and maybe get those links from you to how someone could subscribe to that Wall Street Journal daily update or those types of things. And then we can share them with all the teachers and students joining us today. Because I want to sign up for it too. I just think it's so important to be on top of this information, right? Because it has such a global impact that it's just great to be aware and educated about it. But we just have about 2 more minutes. I guess I'll just kind of open the floor to any of you. Is there anything else that you'd want to share with our students that maybe you weren't able to do during your questions that you just think would be a great kind of closing message? I realize I'm putting you in the hot seat.
I think the one thing I would like to add for technology area is to, like Masood also mentioned, is that you have to keep trying new things, keep have an open mind and innovate, because like in our area, like IoT is something that was not there 5 years ago, just that became so popular in the last couple of years. So you have to be open to new ideas. You have to, if you're reading it about it, you're researching it, you're innovating in that area, you're talking to different people, it'll definitely be very helpful in your own personal career.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think what I would like to say is that you don't stop learning, right? I mean, that's someone just told me that a long time ago, and you always are learning. So you get involved in different level that you can, look at problems, you hear, you get inspired, you keep learning every day. I mean, by no shape or form are we thorough professionals or complete experts on everything that we do, right? There's always new learning, as Shannon said a while back, that no 2 days is the same, right? That's how logistics work, probably, and there's every day there's learning of something new. So don't stop learning. Yeah.
I love that. Well, as an educator, that's like the most perfect way we could end this presentation, right? With that message of don't stop learning, right? Whether it's in school, whether it's in your personal relationships, whether it's in your professional life. So I of course, personally love that. Well, again, I just can't thank you all enough. And Camden, thank you as well for taking time this morning and for putting together such incredible questions for our panelists. And a huge thank you to Agility for working with us to coordinate and for reaching out to all of you and for all your time. This has just been so educational, and we really just can't thank you enough.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely, Jens. And thanks, everybody. Really appreciate it, and have a great weekend,
All
everyone.
right. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.